Coming to you in front of a live studio audience from the lovely Archipelago Studios in the heart of Toronto, it's BND TV. Joining us on today's episode are Seymour Irons, Neena Jayarajan, and musical guest Gordon Monahan. And I'm John Millard. BND TV is brought to you by Bad New Days, creative producer Victor Pokinko. And now, introducing your magnificent host, Bad New Days artistic director Adam Paolozza and local aesthete Gregory O.
Hello everyone out there and welcome to BND TV. I'm Adam Paolozza.
I'm Gregory O.
And I'm Victor Pokinko.
Welcome. BND TV, it's a chance for us to take some of the artists that we work with and some that we admire and give them a chance to shine in a kind of a celebrity vibe talk show setting. Huh?
Yeah, we take the people we really like and we put them on a pedestal or like a plinth.
Yeah, think Graham Norton meets Inside the Actors Studio, meets The Dick Cavett Show, meets maybe a cocktail in hand physical theater artist.
Oh, I love it. I love it. What are you excited about today, Greg?
I'm excited about Coach Prime. Coach Prime leading the Colorado Buffaloes in their first game in Pac-12.
Excellent, excellent. I'll have to ask you what that means later. Not a sports guy. What I'm excited about is our guests. Seymour is a spiritual producer and he creates multifaceted wellness entertainment. He's coming all the way from Kingston. He's a wonderful young emerging artist. I'm so excited to have him.
Actually, I'm excited about Neena Jayarajan.
Uh-huh.
Actor, reviser, deviser, and revitalizer, and classical Indian dancer.
Yeah, and she's just worked on that show with a guest who's on another episode, and they had a little joining of the Indian dance and mime. That'll be something interesting to talk about as well. But enough ado, huh? Let's get the show on the road. Let's have a nice warm welcome to Neena and Seymour. Yeah, have a seat, get comfy. We'll have to play like which is the Diet Coke, which is the rum and
I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
We're just gonna...
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on BND TV. What's new with you guys? Could be a life thing, work thing. Where are you coming from these days, Neena?
I just came back from a performing tour in Vancouver. We took a piece that had 22 dancers who are all women and dancers of color, and it was phenomenal. We also had a contingency of dancers locally that were trained a few months before the show that joined us on stage. So yeah, it's been great.
Is that a piece with Nova?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Love Nova's work. I'm trying to shout out all the people that are, interrelated as well. Amazing. What about you, Seymour?
Well, I just finished up with the Kick and Push last week in Kingston.
Yeah.
I think it's honestly like a full circle moment being here with you today. I think we met at Kick and Push last year. Met Liam Carey. He was like, let's build a project maybe. And now I'm here with you talking about that a little. So
amazing,
it's kind of cool to just wrap that up and then be in a space to share that with you is kind of awesome.
So I want to ask you about your practices, and then we're going to look at a little bit of video footage, and we can talk about that a little bit too. But we're kind of just saying, like, how do you describe your practice?
I always feel like I have to go to a place of where it began to where it is now. So my original training is in two classical Indian dance forms called Bharatanatyam and Odissi. And later, I was with the Manakathakar Dance Company for a million years. And as the years went on, I realized that I had a lot of curiosities around how those forms live in my body and how the influences of the GTA live in my body too. So now I'm doing more contemporary work, but also really have a strong interest in theater and just like the crossovers between my forms and theater art forms. And that's what brought me to companies like Nova Dance, who are doing very interesting experimental work, but using the tools that are in my body. Yeah.
So like storytelling with your body.
Yeah.
I'm quoting you.
Yeah, storytelling with my body, exactly. Yeah.
Which has been kind of a theme on some of the other episodes as well. So I love that we're getting a lot of different angles. And I was mentioning to you just before we started shooting that we were kind of talking about ballet in another episode too, and that also the relationship of like virtuosity, is that a good thing, and how do we take forms that are, you know, maybe sometimes so rigid, and exactly what you're saying, then take new influences. So I hope we can get into a little bit of that as we keep talking. Yeah, awesome. Mr. Irons?
Yeah, my process feels very meditative, if that makes sense. Everything that I've created doesn't actually start with, hey, I want to make this thing. It's usually like, okay, we feel this thing, and let's say we create a song. After that, we're like, okay, 2 days later, now I'm inspired by this song that we just made. Let's draw a picture. Now it's like, okay, now we have these 2 pieces of an animation starting here. So I feel often it's like, I'll be in a space of almost boredom, or in a space of I'm kind of just doing nothing, and then I'll get like an instant, oh, okay, this feels good. Let's follow that, and then it leads to something bigger. My process, I want to say it's a little chaotic because of that. That starting in the unknown space, if you can understand, that's kind of weird.
Totally. Could you tell me a little bit too, because I know, like, well, I'll just drop a little quick anecdote. When Seymour also has, like, how would you describe it? I described it in the introduction, but I want you to describe the sort of more spiritual aspect of your practice.
Yeah, it's like, the way that I try to explain it without sounding like a crazy person is like, it's a mixture of production
Everyone's crazy on this show. So
I like that.
No.
It's a mixture of production as well as wellness, is like what I like to call it, or entertainment as well as wellness.
Yeah, I love how you put those two together. Talk more about that.
Yeah, because I think that wellness can be void of entertainment. People can sit there and, you know, just meditate, or they can, you know, eat better for themselves, or just start to care more for their body, and that can feel good in a self-love kind of way, but then some people might not actually feel like they're experiencing anything. They could just be shifting routines, and that is them contributing to their own wellness. When it comes to like the entertainment side of it, it's like, that's, you know, leisure time. What are we doing to feel better? What I try to do is combine the two of those. So let's say there's practices where, you know, we like to meditate, or we like to go within and think, okay, the last week, maybe I was a bit more harsh in this area. This week, let me see how can I do a bit more better here. Those kind of self-reflective kind of processes. Let's say we take that self-reflection and say, okay, how can we make self-reflection entertaining? Okay, is it we put someone in a room and it's them, you know, self-reflecting, and we're playing with holograms and having that being projected, and then, you know, someone can see that self-reflection. They're getting inspired by this wellness / performance, but it's not necessarily classical entertainment or simply like just wellness.
Yeah. We've talked to other people in the show too, have talked about the role of art as being kind of like medicine as well for the, you know, for the soul, or whatever you want to call it. And I feel like this is living in that world. And I just have to say, Seymour does card readings as well. And when we worked with him last summer, everyone got a reading, and it's one of the best readings I've ever had. Like, I still am energized from the positivity, and I don't know how Seymour does it, but you were saying some stuff, I'm like, you can't, how would you know? Like, how could you know that? So whatever you're doing, man, I'm really digging it. Like,
so how could you know that?
I'm still figuring out this myself. Okay, there's some things that I'm like, I can't actually answer how I know that. It's more like, again, starting in that place of like meditation in the unknown. It's allowing yourself to go into a space that a lot of people are afraid of, or I'm gonna say sometimes avoid. We all have access to this, let's say, to all of the information that's available, or that seems like it's hidden. We all have access to this, but a lot of us avoid it, or sometimes will ignore it, because sometimes looking into it will actually be a lot more harsh than our current state might feel like. But if we allow ourselves to kind of start to like go into like that space here, information from that place comes back towards us, and it's usually helpful information.
And also you work a lot with movement as well, right? And we're gonna later, well, in a moment, we're gonna look at a clip from both of your work, but that's gonna be more the theme of the clip that we're gonna see, right?
Yes. This project was kind of difficult, I'm gonna say at the start, because I wanted to take that very meditative approach to create it initially, but when it comes to like applying for festivals and whatnot, they're like, look, you gotta make this thing make sense for us. And I'm like, okay, let me try to make it make sense for you. So I was like, okay, let me look at Kingston. What are the histories? How can we try to create a piece that responds to Kingston, but we can still almost like embed that in wellness? by making it a response that helps communities. So being a black person in Kingston it's not a very diverse place. I don't know if you've been to Kingston. It's not a very diverse place. There isn't a large black arts community there, but I was hoping to like possibly almost like base my project in that. I sent out a call. I didn't have one black mover audition, and I was like, man, it's kind of hard to do a piece that responds to this and that responds to culture, and we don't actually have the bodies that represent this culture kind of situation. And then I was okay, we got approved. We have people auditioning who don't necessarily fit our initial kind of project scope, kind of wanting to respond for the black community and kind of grow a space for us to kind of create more art there. I had amazing movers who joined on, and I was like, okay, we're gonna use embodiment anyways. How can we expand that even more? So instead of it being like just a performance or a performance that responded or was just about like black culture, it ended up becoming something more spiritual, where we used embodiment to kind of talk about the elements, earth and water, and how those are like in the spaces that we are often in, but don't necessarily give our mind attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really cool. I think we're probably going to touch later about space for different cultures and is there, isn't there. But before we talk about that though, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the clip that we're going to look of your work.
Okay. This is a clip from a show I just did in Vancouver. We received the video and I was like, oh, I'll just share a clip of a section that I do with 4 other dancers, and there's like a solo moment, but it has elements that come from my training in both Bharatanatyam and Odissi, but also it's like a reimagining of it, the vocabulary, so it's like got glimpses of a few things.
Yeah, I thought it was very playful as well.
Yeah, and there's a bit of storytelling, there's a bit of gestural language, and like a sharing of emotion to the audience.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's have a look at Neena's clip, and then we'll have a look at Seymour's clip after that. Great. Thanks so much for sharing that video, Neena. And now we're going to have a look at some footage from a work by Seymour. And this is a work in development?
Yes, this is phase 1 of Project Sooth Shivers.
Sooth Shivers, I love the name. All right, let's have a look. And in the clip that we saw, how much is that you bringing your own contemporary storytelling, and like what's the mixture in that of sort of classical, new and old, for lack of better expression? Yeah.
So in Nova's processes, all of the work, most of it is done from a place of using the dancers and whatever they bring to the table. So this particular section, she taught us a work that she has done for 20 years, and we were given the liberties to change or alter or bring our elements to it. So that's why I was able to bring a few of the forms that I practice and bring up different emotions. I created my own story in my brain that whether it's shared to the audience or not doesn't matter, but totally. As long as it touches or connects to someone, it was always allowed.
Yeah, you said something when we were talking earlier, or in the questionnaire, about using the dancer's body as sort of a catalyst for your creativity as well. Like, is that more when you're choreographing, or?
Yeah, I find that in watching, trying different processes, I notice that the most intriguing or authentic work is when the dancers or the creators are able to do what comes to them naturally, instead of trying to like recreate choreography on them. I find is always a little bit, it's good sometimes, but sometimes it feels mechanical or it doesn't feel like they love it in their bodies. So when I love when watching, I'll say like, pick a move that you really love, like give me your favorite step. Now let's try like taking it to the ground. Let's try like dissecting the body in half, see what happens. Let's input an emotional attachment to that movement, which was just a plain move. So I like playing with those kind of ideas to see what happens to watching the brain work, watching the face change, watching the bodies change, and sometimes we take music out entirely. Like I'm a very musically connected person, but sometimes I challenge myself by taking out the music to see what happens.
Just before we go to Seymour, is there any improvisation in that? Or in the process or in the product, is there space for improvisation?
Both, yeah. I mean, traditional classical Indian dance work has limited improvisation. There's a little bit if you have the luxury of having live music and things like that, but otherwise the choreography tends to be very calculated, very rhythmic, ends at a specific note and has certain rules and things like that. All the work that I've recently been in the last few years has involved a lot of improvisation, which has been really enlightening and just super interesting, because coming from a very rigid background of rules and regulations and forms, being given the liberty to just kind of see what happens, I'm like, oh, I have things that I want to share, and I didn't realize I had those things to share. And when given the freedom to do so, it's really been enlightening. Cool. Yeah.
I'm going to throw 2 words out to the 2 of you and respond to both or one. They're just some words that have been popping up that I think are interesting. Rigor, however you want to understand that, and also joy, or like pleasure, something else that we've talked a lot about. Are those? Is there space for those in your processes and your practices, or do you think about those, or how do you think? Rigor, I think, is something interesting because Greg has been talking a lot about virtuosity over the last couple episodes as well, and how do we understand that? Is that how would you describe that?
Simply doing something really well.
Yeah,
I guess.
And we were kind of talking more in a context of like some contemporary stuff, like like in a classical pianist context, there's a certain received way that things are done. So you could maybe more easily tell if something is virtuoso. But in areas that are maybe more experimental, or when you're bringing in sort of stuff that's maybe a little bit more fluid than the rigid form, not rigid in a bad way, where is there a new kind of virtuosity that can emerge? And we were sort of talking about maybe that comes through rigor, whatever that means, but how do you hear those 2 words?
Instinctively, when I think of rigor, I also go down this timeline of where I started my training. Rigor was clearly associated with repetition and extensive practice, and do it again and again and again, and then you pass out and you do it again. That was kind of the idea around what rigor is. Now, later in my life, going into the 40s, that kind of rigor is not sustainable. And then I think more about what is an embodied type of rigor. What are the things that I need to maintain myself mentally so that I can physically have a practice that is long lasting. So whether that means meditation every night, whether that means what I put in my body, whether it means me listening to the song of a piece that I'm doing and visualizing it 1,000 times in its perfection versus just doing it over and over again and I'm still not getting it. So there's something that I've learned about just what process is for myself that I think is the only way that I can find the joy. And if I don't, because sometimes when you're in that rigid place of repetition, you start to lose the joy and you have this negative association with it because it's hard or it's too difficult or it's not attainable. So I find myself switching the narrative in my brain around finding joy doesn't have to be the perfection of landing that piece and not wanting to pass out from the fatigue. It's about like, how does it feel when I do those things? Do I feel like I've sprayed joy into an audience? And so I do nowadays crave that from an audience perspective too. And maybe it's post or wherever stage of the pandemic we're in. The now, I find that I want to see more joyful work, or not necessarily like, you know, balloons and stuff. I mean, just work that came from a place of like finding who you are and not necessarily like landing all the kicks and jumps and, you know, that doesn't impress me as much anymore, but I find that I'm more intrigued by embodied work that's authentic and looks like someone did a lot of work, whether it's someone who's walked from the back of the room to the front and took 20 minutes to do it. I just, like me feeling stressed about watching that and feeling all the emotions that go through that, that's something I find new ways of finding joy.
100%,
It's really lovely. I think my response, I'm going to focus on the word pleasure, honestly,
and take
first.
it however you want to take it too.
To be honest, when it comes to our work, and especially first getting into the body, we try to almost like find pleasure first. We find that, at least within movement and embodiment, when people like first get into the space, we're like, okay, we're trying to be perfect and like the right thing, and then there isn't actually pleasure that's happening. It's like, if I am perfect, then I will feel pleasurable, and then it's like, okay, that's not actually it. It's like, before we even fully get into that net, it's like, okay, find the pleasure in your body. Like, where does it feel good? Do you need to crack your back like this? Do you need to like do something a little bit odd? Kind of starting the work with that, like, where does pleasure feel in the body? And then we're doing this embodiment practice where we're then going, okay, now we are adding earth, we're adding water into it. So it's like we've already started with the pleasure principle there, so it's almost like, this is honestly where I have to almost like rethink a few of my work actually, where in this sense it's like, we enjoy making the work the whole time. It's almost like when we focus on the pleasure, we love it, but does the audience? That's what we just want to make sure of. Or one thing that we're still figuring out, because with our residency, it was hard to get enough feedback for us to be like, do people enjoy this, or are we just having fun at the park kind of thing here? Like, where is that line between, you know, do people just have fun watching us have fun? Or, you know, is it like, how do we make this fun for us and for the audience? So personally, if I'm answering this right, it feels like that pleasure principle is very important as long as it's like the audience's pleasure and the performer's pleasure.
I think that's really interesting that what you talk about there, how, because in my training too, and my kind of philosophy of work is the performer has to have pleasure, even if you're playing a villain, even if you have to die in a scene or something that, you know, wouldn't be pleasurable in real life. And I do think, like, I mean, I haven't seen your piece live, but even watching it, my director eyes, I tune into that right away. Oh yeah, they are, because there is maybe I don't know what you call it, a detachment if you're not having pleasure in what you're doing, and I think it is very important. But then I do think what you said too, that's interesting, at what point is it, okay, it has to go away from this sphere of pleasure for us and then start to, and how that happens, I don't know. Maybe that's, also, maybe it's not your job unless you're the director, So let the director do that.
Seymour, do you have a background or training in like any sort of like more forms that are more like structured in any way, like ballroom dancing or anything? Or
In terms of movement, zero, to be honest. Yeah, a lot of my actual like artistic training is in media and performance production. So like anything that's like AR, VR, digital, that's like my kind of realm. When you were talking about like how do we almost like that rigor and how do we like almost like keep falling in love with the work again, have you thought about like the intersections of technology into like older classical theater forms? It's like holding that classical essence and saying, okay, let's augment it now. Let's put it into VR, you know, or let's say we wanted to do a live movement piece or a live anything piece. We bring our audience in and they have headsets on, and a part of it, like we're playing with augmenting reality now, but we are still keeping that like initial art form. Like at least I guess I'm asking that because I'm while also saying that is my approach simultaneously.
Well, I was going to ask, because you had talked about AI a little bit when we talked before, so I was going to ask you about that anyway. So I mean, I feel like who cares what I think about that? Let's see what do you? I'm actually I'm not that I'm a Luddite in real life, but the older I get, just to answer your question quickly, and then I want to hear more what you have to say, but I'm kind of like desperately holding on to the really slow technology of live theater. I feel like live theater is one of the oldest forms of technology we have to understand ourselves, and I kind of, whether I'm self-appointed or not, I kind of feel like I want to take that flame and keep it alive in these kind of crazy times and sort of insist on liveness, which is funny because we're doing a digital now. This is all because of it's a digital initiative to help live performers sort of pivot. And actually we wanted to have people like you on who are working in live mediums. I know you do both, but I know you more as a mover and an actor, yeah. But I'm kind of like, I love that stuff, I'll watch it sometimes, but I kind of feel like that's not what I have to offer. But I'm curious, I think there's so much room for that. So I'm curious, where do you see the future of that, or how do you do that in your practice?
Help us, please.
Help us older gentlemen on this side of the couch.
I finished up a research internship with, I don't know if you guys have heard of Folda or Spiderweb Show. They are like one of the first kind of companies that are doing this live digital theater kind of thing. And a lot of their performances and work will take like a classical, it could be a one-man show. And now they've just added projection mappings to it. And that tiny shift has like, it's not that it hasn't increased the visual value of the performance, but it's like you're being immersed into it in a new way where it feels like, okay, I'm not watching a film and I'm also not playing a video game, and I am with other people, but we're experiencing this shift in our reality together. I feel like the change is not necessarily to the art itself, but to the way in which we view them. Being able to take like that classical theater and like souping it up with a bit of media technology doesn't actually pull people out of the theater space or pull people away from connecting. It just brings us together even more, I want to say, but in a new way. Yeah.
And when you were talking about one of the things you mentioned was like, not necessarily a fear of AI, but maybe we're all a little bit nervous about where AI is going. I mean, for me, it's also about copyright and whose work is being used to train these AIs. But how do you see this? The picture you described there sounds really nice and like inclusive and kind of connecting us. How do you see where it could go the other way?
Like the negative version of that would probably be in regards to who creates our AIs and how people respond to how those AIs perform in two different ways. I think when it comes to AI technologies, we have to remember that these technologies they'll acknowledge that AIs have is all that, let's say, humanity's put into the internet, okay? So they're not gonna be like, you can't be like, okay, could you tell me this secret about my mother that's never been posted on the internet? The AI is not gonna be able to do that kind of thing here. So when it comes to like working with this technology, it's being able to say, okay, this is a friend or a tool here who can help me produce, but I don't own it and it doesn't own me, but we collaborate together. And if we can actually almost use the technology in that way, we won't find a dark kind of avenue. Let's say if it's like, oh shoot, all of these very toxic perspectives are, programming all of these AIs, and now a bunch of young people are being fed this content, and AIs have gone really bad now. It seems like we would get to a point where ownership doesn't exist anymore. Art almost starts to lose its soul value, and in a weird way, it's hard for me to say fully on a negative, but my brain goes, and then people revert back to in-person theater, and it's a lot more, like it feels like there's always like a weird rebirth that comes out of like, even if there is like a, AI goes this bad, then we end up seeing why we shouldn't have done it, kind of. You know, there's always a revert, but I do think that we can use it to benefit our new media kind of shifts when it comes to performance and classical production types.
Right, it could actually make something astonishing, right? It could be the perfect, it's an amazing idea that AI is collaborator. Yeah, maybe that's how we get to that next level.
Like the world being what it is right now, which, what did we say this morning? It's very tense.
There's tension.
There's tension in the world is, obviously there's a lot going on. We don't even need to say what it all is. As a mom, as an artist, as artists, how do you keep making work? How do you find, a question that I always ask myself, and the pandemic, when we were in the full-blown, you know, like the lockdowns and the heat of it, it was really like, I had a lot of time to think about what am I doing? What do I want to do when this sort of passes or changes? And is it meaningful? Is it useful? I don't want to say anything else. I want to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, instinctively for me, I always, for a million years, thought the minute I have kids, my dance career is over. Because that's the narrative I was fed. And that's kind of the idea of like career suicide if you tried to have kids. And in many art forms, it's kind of the thing. And I had my first son and I was like, oh my God, I have more purpose than this. There was this moment where I felt like I need to prove and show so much to this person about who I am, the identity of his mother. And then I felt like I went at it full force, more than I ever did, post having children. And I also, you know, I don't take for granted that I work in a field where all the time that I'm away from my children, I'm able to show them a final product of what I was doing. Whereas like a lot of parents struggle with that because they're away and they're like, I was at the office, I was at this, I was at that, you know, and they don't have anything to show for it. But I'm just like, come to my show. It's like, oh, that's where you were. And it's just, that is such a privilege that I don't take lightly. So for me, all the things I thought about preconceived notions about like having children being a bad thing changed my outlook. I felt like my purpose was like really clear. It became crystal clear.
Honestly, in a way, it's like that. The negative state of the world is why I create almost. It's like there's nothing else I can do. That's my response to it. That's how I feel better because of it. It's like this. We started with describe your process, and I was like, honestly, it starts in meditation, and then forms from there. And that need for that meditation is because of the state that we're in. That the world is not perfect, but going within and like almost like, okay, how can I calm myself? How can I make sure that I'm not turning into this place here? I start to create things, things start to come out of me that then grow into other things. So it's almost like if the world was happy and blah, 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 I don't even know how to say it. I probably wouldn't have to make any art because life would feel like a painting every day. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I could, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I agree with you. I think that too. Like, I obviously struggle with those questions. Like, shouldn't I be out, like, you know, chaining myself to a tree or something, or like protesting? But I think, yeah, we talked a little bit about fate in another episode too, and being called to something. Yeah, maybe it's.
There's also the the arrogance of thinking you know what's going to happen, right? Not to be an optimist, because I'm not. But really? I don't actually. You can't say you know what will happen.
That's true too. Yeah.
And I feel like there's ways to have those protests in the work that you do without having to chain yourself to a tree. You know, the choices you make, the people you surround yourself with, the projects you take on or don't take on. And those are hard decisions. And sometimes you feel like, but it's such a good gig, but it's questioning my morals. And I think that's a protest as well. So that's something I also grappled with a lot because, you know, as a woman of color who comes from a form that maybe not everybody knows, who's wants to be in theater or wants to be in dance but doesn't fit the mold, you know, I have to question the intentions of everything and everyone that I work with. Of course, yeah. And sometimes that feels like a protest, but sometimes it's just standing up for my entire community. And I'm holding them on my shoulders. And I think that's, it's really important to do that.
Any last thoughts to leave us with before we move on?
I don't know.
I think that was a pretty, pretty nice I'm just thinking about a lot of stuff that the two of you have already said. Yeah. So, well, good. Thanks so much. We'll take a little short break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk to artist Gordon Monahan. All right. Yeah, that's so great.
So that was a piece of work by an artist who was, in 2013, the Governor General Award winner for Media Arts. He is a co-director of the Electric Eclectics Festival in Meaford, Ontario. Would you please welcome Gordon Monahan.
Thanks for coming, man.
Service. The service in this
I'd like
show.
to mention I'm co-director of the Electric Eclectics Festival with my co-director, Laura Kikauka.
Amazing. So that was a piece called Speaker Swinging. I couldn't actually stop my body from moving when I was watching it. Quite amazing. So, but can you tell us about it?
That's a piece that I've been doing since 1982. It came out of thinking about the idea of, well, there are two things. Thinking about the idea of moving sound around and the Doppler effect, and at the same time thinking about how to animate electronic music. So, you know, in the old days, electronic music often consisted of, electronic music concert often consisted of having a tape recorder that someone pushed play and the tape went around and you heard this electronic music. And it's the same problem exists today, but the tape recorder has been replaced with a laptop, and you go to an electronic music concert and you're watching someone staring at a laptop. Not that the music can't be exciting, but there's a continuing problem with the lack of something else going on.
Is it a lack of liveness, maybe?
Yeah, lack of performance, I suppose. In any case, I had this idea that we needed to pay attention to the loudspeaker itself because that's where the sound is coming out of. And we often ignore loudspeakers, actually. We treat them as pieces of furniture. They sit off in the corner, and we don't pay attention to them, even though they are the source of where the sound is coming from. So I started with that idea, and then I realized that if you take a loudspeaker and swing it around your head, that you would get this at one time you would have the Doppler effect created, which is a physical phenomenon, acoustical phenomenon, where if a moving object creating sound is coming towards you, the pitch goes up, and if it's going away from you, the pitch goes down, even though the pitch itself doesn't change. It's the movement of the sound source that creates this Doppler effect. And in addition, it's somewhat mesmerizing as well, because it's a little bit of a hypnotic physical movement.
Yeah, I know, and I know versions have been done in Canada many times. Has it found success elsewhere?
I've done it quite a few times internationally, across Europe and the United States, and once in Asia, in Hong Kong.
Cool. And I think you had said to me before you might have done it in Milan as well.
Yes, that was a bit of a unique experience because it was part of a Hugo Boss fashion show, which I couldn't turn down.
Well, obviously.
Yeah. No, they needed, but it needed to be like a 5-minute version. You know, the piece normally takes about 25 minutes. It's a process piece and physical leg piece, but they needed it to be a very quick 5 minutes. So I agreed, like, no problem, we'll do a 5-minute version.
So this piece is sort of going into the realm of almost sound sculpture. These days, are you a musician? Like, do you call yourself a musician or a sound artist or a sculptor?
Depends on what I'm doing, I suppose.
Yeah?
But yeah, I do. I am a musician, but I don't play that often. But when I do, I play primarily piano or electric organ. I dabble in the theremin once in a while. But most of the work I've done, I suppose, fits into the genre of sound art, sound installation. Some pieces move into the area of interactive, computer-based sound pieces. I collaborate with a choreographer, Bill Coleman. We're doing interactive brainwave controlled music and stage lighting and choreography, sort of all mixed together.
And mousetraps.
Pardon me?
And mousetraps.
And mousetraps, yes, that's a piece called Dollhouse that we did with several hundred mousetraps.
Bill Coleman dancing on several hundred mousetraps.
I've seen some of that's amazing.
And so you got your start in punk bands?
No, classical piano, and then when I was a young teenager, I started playing in rock bands. We basically just did cover, versions of classic rock, which in those days wasn't classic yet. It was still,
And then did you do a degree in music or philosophy? Or?
Yeah, I started studying science, and then I found out that you could study music at university. So then I went to Mount Allison University, and I studied conservatory, 4-year Bachelor of Music. So I was kind of developing a career as a contemporary pianist, but then I got so busy doing my own work, both for piano and then the speaker swinging and then sound sculpture, sound installations, that I no longer had the time to devote to daily practice.
It's almost like your piano career went over a cliff.
Yes.
Which is a great segue. We're going to watch.
Just like when you throw pianos.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know this piece because you just came from living 2 years in St. John's, and this was a piece that had been performed, not when I was there, at Sound Symposium. Do you want to set it up?
Yeah. That was in 1988. I was invited by Don Wary, who was the co-founder of Sound Symposium, along with Kathy Clark. And Don invited me to do a piece with, which is called Long Aeolian Piano. And it involves taking an old piano and attaching very long piano wires coming through the soundboard.
Like how long?
Up to, I have done versions up to 70 meters long.
Okay, that's
So
pretty
200
long.
and some
I call
feet
that
long.
Yeah.
In the St. John's case, there was maybe about 100 feet, 30 meters, perhaps 40 meters. But his idea was to airlift a piano to the top of the hill beside Signal Hill, which overlooks the harbor of St. John's. You can see the top of the hill from downtown St. John's. And so he organized a helicopter to pick the piano up and brought it up to the top of Gibbets Hill. And then the piece, when we suspended the long piano wires over the cliff, and that they were activated by the wind, which creates a continuous mid-frequency resonance in the strings that sounds strangely electronic, even though it's entirely acoustically produced. And you hear the sound coming out of the piano. And you can hear it quite far away. And you could walk up to the top of this hill with a staircase path. It's part of the national park for Signal Hill. And so they have like a pedestrian way to walk up to the top of this hill, and you can hear the piano resonating as you're approaching the top of the hill. In any case, at the end of the festival, it was time to take the piano down, and instead of having the helicopter take it down, we threw it over the cliff.
And this was a Coast Guard
of course,
helicopter.
why would you? Yes, yeah, the Coast Guard helicopter was the helicopter that brought it up for us.
There were 4 ships that capsized in the meantime.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, thankfully no disasters at sea at that moment.
well, let's have a look at this.
It's one thing to suggest we're going to throw it over the cliff. It's another thing to do it. It's not easy, but it was more the gesture, and I suppose I might add that I heard your remarks regarding discussing virtuosity in music, and I realized at some point early in my career that you didn't have to be a virtuoso if you took a different approach to thinking about music and the instruments. And I then realized that I could think of a piano as a sound sculpture or as a machine to produce sound. And this is an example of using the piano as a sculptural object rather than what it was designed to function as, which would be to produce music that one played on the piano. So there are different ways to think of music than just playing it.
I want to just ask a little question, and we're going to later see one of your, I don't know, do you call it a sound sculpture, the thing that we're going to see later?
Yeah.
And the way that you're talking about the physicality of sound, like in theater, as a director, my first thought is the space. How am I using the space? How does space dilate? How is it affected by the movement of the actors? And I guess we're working with time too, but I think maybe that conversation in music is maybe more well covered. But I'm interested to hear you talk about how do you think of space when you're making your pieces?
Well, it's really important, obviously, because acoustics require space. And sound, therefore, requires space. So you can think of space as being an instrument or a facet or an aspect of the instrument, because if you play sound, you require space in order for sound to exist. So there's that part of it, and then there's also the space that gives you the context for putting something on exhibit in that space. And that space, I do a number of pieces outdoors, and oftentimes you get the opportunity to create a piece in a location that is particularly dramatic, just in its geography or the context of where it is. And so for instance, that piece in St. John's, it was a dramatic location overlooking the harbor, and it's just built in there. So in that sense, you just use the space. You don't oftentimes have to do much. The space is there, and it has its own drama built in.
Let's talk a little bit about the thing that we're gonna, the sculpture that we're gonna look at after.
Yeah, I brought a group of sound sculpture pieces. 3 of them are loudspeaker pieces that are from a series I started doing in 1989. I call it Music from Nowhere. I take vintage loudspeaker cabinets and I remove the speakers and I replace the interior of the loudspeaker cabinet with a sound making device. And then I put a plexiglass window on the back of the sound of the speaker cabinet. So then exhibit these groups of speaker cabinets in a gallery space and play with the idea that if you see a loudspeaker, you're assuming you're listening to audio. But because the speakers have been removed and replaced with real sounds, you're not listening to audio, you're listening to an imitation of audio. And part of the reason, the concept behind the piece is to discuss or to present the idea that audio in itself has a false quality to it. It's a simulation of a sound that was taking place in another place at another time, if it's a recording of a sound, or if it's an amplification of a sound. That sound is not happening in the speaker, it's happening somewhere else, and it's being transmitted and replicated through the electromagnetic medium of the loudspeaker. And we often don't think of that as what audio is, and audio is a replica of a real sound event. And you can take that a step further and think about how pop music, for instance, is assembled. I didn't say performed, I said assembled, because, you know, multi-tracking allows instruments to be played at different times and layering to create an impression of an ensemble, of a group playing.
Yeah, like different studios even.
Exactly, recorded at different times, different studios. They'll play one instrument and they'll go, well, that didn't work, let's try a different instrument. And you're assembling the product and imitating a musical group by doing so. And then, you know, even to the effect that sometimes bands have to then learn how to play the song after they've produced the recording. So, you know, that explains the fakeness of audio.
So is vinyl less fake than digital, or are they just fake?
They're just completely fake.
Nice.
But
yes.
But I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm just making an observation. I'm not against it. It's just the way it is, you know. So yeah, you know, we don't. If you look at a photograph of a street in the city, wherever, it's not, it isn't the street itself, it's a picture of the street, you know. Same thing with film or video. It's not the place, it's a rendition of it, it's a simulacrum of reality. So in any case, we will have a look at these speaker cabinets I brought along. And then I brought a fourth piece which relates to this Music from Nowhere series, but it's different because what I had this idea was to take appliances that make sounds and then record those appliances and then embed the sound into the appliance itself. So I brought, for instance, a printer photocopier that makes its own sound. So, you know, like an instrument makes its own sound, right? Like a piano will sound like a piano, but it's like, that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to produce its own sound. Like a drum is supposed to sound like a drum. A cymbal is supposed to sound like a cymbal. But if you could then embed those sounds into the instrument, they're already embedded there. But, you know, it's the same thing with a photocopier or with a coffee machine. They make the sounds that they make.
Or a train.
Or a train, or a car, or whatever. But, you know, so then I'm just objectifying those objects by embedding the sound that they make into them, which is...
All right, well,
it's sort of the inverse of the other piece, maybe a little bit.
A little bit of the inverse of the other piece, because it's the actual sound of itself. Yeah. It also relates somewhat to the Marcel Duchamp idea of the ready-made, let's say.
Let's find out what that all means
after
the break.
We're going to take a short break, Awesome.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of BND TV. Thank you to all our special guests. We're going to leave you with Gordon Monahan's Music from Nowhere.